My son's wife uninvited me from Thanksgiving dinner at my own lake house. I found out through a text message meant for someone else. That's how it started. Not with a fight, not with a confrontation. A text. 6 words that accidentally landed in my inbox instead of wherever it was supposed to go. Make sure he doesn't show up. He. That was me. The man whose name is on the deed. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, most of it with the same firm in Knoxville, Tennessee. I built bridges for a living, real ones, steel and concrete, the kind that carry 60,000 cars a day. I know how things hold together, and I know when something's about to give way. That text message was a crack in the foundation. I just didn't know yet how deep it ran. Let me back up. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, everything I have. He married Felicity 3 years ago. She's sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who walks into her room and immediately understands the power structure. I told myself that was a good thing. I told myself that at the rehearsal dinner, at the wedding, at every holiday dinner where I noticed she'd rearranged the seating so I was always at the far end of the table. My late wife, Carol, passed 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, I sold our house in the suburbs and bought the lake property up in Norris, about 40 minutes north of Knoxville, on Norris Lake, 2,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch that faces west so you catch the sunset over the water every single evening from April through October. Carol always wanted a lake house. I bought it after she died because I needed somewhere that felt like a decision I made for love rather than grief. My son knew what that place meant. He'd grown up fishing with me on that same lake at a rental cabin 2 miles down the road. When Felicity suggested they use the lake house for Thanksgiving, her first Thanksgiving hosting, she said she wanted to do something special. I said yes without hesitating. Of course. The house is big enough. The kitchen is well equipped. I'd have the porch, the water, my grandson Oliver, who was 4 years old and already convinced that every fish in Norris Lake was personally his friend. That was the plan. A family Thanksgiving, my house, my son, my daughter-in-law Oliver, and Felicity's parents were driving up from Chattanooga. What I did not know, what I found out from that misdirected text, was that Felicity had also invited 11 other people. Her college roommates, her former colleagues, a couple she and my son had befriended at their gym. 11 strangers in my house, sleeping in my rooms, eating at my table, and I was not supposed to be there. I read that text 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long moment looking out my window at the lake. I did not call my son right away. That was the old me. The me who called immediately, who needed things resolved, who couldn't sit with discomfort. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, and I thought about the last 18 months. The way Felicity had started referring to the lake house as our place in conversations. Not your dad's place. Not the lake house. Our place. I'd let it go. I thought she was just being casual. The way she'd asked me, gently, whether I'd considered updating the property. New furniture, she said. A smart TV in the main bedroom. A new kayak rack. She'd even sent me links. At the time, I thought she was being helpful. She had taste, I give her that, though I wondered whether she was decorating a space she'd already mentally claimed. The way she'd stopped asking whether visits were convenient and started announcing them. We're coming up the weekend of the 14th, not a question. I always said yes because my son was always with her and Oliver was always with them, and I would take whatever weekend I could get with my grandson. I finished my coffee, then I called my attorney. His name is a man I've known for 20 years. First as a client when I needed a contract reviewed, then as something close to a friend. We've had lunch together every month or so since his wife and Carol used to be in the same book club. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what I'd found out. I told him about the accumulation of small things I'd been ignoring. I asked him whether there was anything I should be doing to protect the property. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You put it in a revocable living trust when you bought it, right?" I had. He'd advised it at the time. The lake house was held in a trust, the Carol Ann Whitmore Revocable Living Trust, named for my wife. My son was named as the successor beneficiary, meaning the property would transfer to him upon my death. But right now, while I was alive, I was the sole trustee. I controlled it completely. Then you're fine, he said. But I'd suggest we revisit the terms, and I'd suggest you have a conversation with your son. Not Felicity, your son. I drove to their house in West Knoxville that Saturday morning. I didn't call ahead. I knew if I called ahead, Felicity would be prepared. And I didn't need her prepared. I needed my son. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, coffee in hand, looking surprised to see me. Oliver came barreling around the corner about 3 seconds later and hit my kneecaps like a small cannonball, which is his standard greeting, and I love it completely. I told Oliver I'd brought him something from the tackle box, an old lure I'd been promising to give him, and that let my son settle him in the kitchen with a snack while the two of us sat in the living room. I showed him the text. He read it twice. I watched something move across his face, not surprise exactly. More like the expression of a man who'd been hoping a certain thing wouldn't happen, and now it had. She planned a bigger gathering, he said. She thought it might be awkward with me there, in my house. He didn't answer that. He looked down at his coffee mug. Did you know? I asked. He was quiet for long enough that I had my answer. I didn't think she'd actually, he started. But you knew she was planning it this way. He set down his mug. She feels like you're always watching, like nothing she does is good enough. She thinks you compare her to Mom. I sat with that. Maybe there was some truth in it. I don't know. What I do know is that whatever Felicity felt about me did not give her the right to organize a gathering of 14 people in my home and arrange for me to be absent from it. That's not a daughter-in-law setting a boundary. That's something else. I need you to understand something, I said to my son. The lake house is mine. Carol's and mine. I bought it after your mother died, and I put her name on the trust because that place is the closest thing I have to her. I've given you and Felicity open access to it because I love you, and because I love Oliver, and because I believed we were family. But family doesn't mean I hand over the keys and disappear. My son looked up at me. His eyes were red at the edges. He's 41 years old, and in that moment he looked about 19. I know, he said. Does she understand that property, what it is, legally? I don't think she's thought about it that way. I think she has, I said, and I left it at that. I drove home and called my attorney again. We spent about an hour on the phone. I didn't want to disinherit my son. That was never on the table. But I wanted the trust restructured so that the terms were explicit. No property rights transferred during my lifetime period. Any use of the lake house required written consent from me as trustee. If I became incapacitated, a successor trustee, my attorney, would manage the property, not my son's household. My son would still inherit it when I was gone. But until then, it was mine. In writing. My attorney drafted the amendment within the week. I signed it, it was notarized, it was filed. Quiet, clean, legal. I did not tell Felicity any of this. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, she called me. Bright voice, casual tone. The kind of performance I'd learned to read by then. She wanted to coordinate arrival times. She mentioned, as if reminding me of something I already knew, that she'd invited some friends, that the house would be full, that I might be more comfortable staying at the Holiday Inn Express in Andersonville rather than adding to the chaos. Holiday Inn Express, 40 minutes from my own lake house. I let her finish. Then I said, very calmly, I think there may have been some miscommunication. I'll be there Wednesday evening. I'll need my bedroom as usual, but I look forward to meeting everyone. Silence on the other end of the line. I thought. She started. Wednesday evening, I said. I'll bring the pecan pie, Carol's recipe. I hung up. What happened next, I want to be honest about. It wasn't clean. It wasn't a movie moment where I walked in and everything resolved itself in 90 minutes. Real things don't work like that. I arrived Wednesday evening as I said I would. My son met me in the driveway. Felicity's friends' cars were already there. I counted 7 vehicles on the property. The house had been rearranged. The furniture in the living room was pushed back. A folding table had been set up in the dining room to accommodate the larger group. And someone had moved Carol's photo from the mantel to the top of the bookshelf in the hallway. That photo. It's a 5x7 in a silver frame. Carol on the porch of a rental cabin on Norris Lake about 2 weeks before we knew she was sick. She's laughing at something off camera. Her hair is doing what it always did in Lake Wind, just completely in the wrong direction. And she loved that photo because she said it was the most honest picture anyone had ever taken of her. I walked past it in the hallway without saying anything. I put my bag in my bedroom, which was, at least, still mine. And I washed up and went to the kitchen to put the pecan pie in the refrigerator. Felicity's college roommate was at the counter. She was nice. They all were, actually. Her friends, her colleagues, the gym couple, none of them knew the situation. They were just people at a lake house for Thanksgiving, and I was just the older guy who owned the place. That's what I was that weekend, the older guy who owned the place. I sat at my own table, and I made conversation, and I helped my son carry in firewood, and I read to Oliver twice, once before bed Wednesday night, once Thursday morning, and I ate Thanksgiving dinner with 14 people I mostly didn't know. Felicity was careful with me, polite, deliberate, the warmth calibrated to exactly the right temperature for public consumption. My son watched us both like a man waiting for something to explode. Nothing exploded. Friday morning, I was on the porch with my coffee before anyone else was up. The lake was perfectly still. A great blue heron landed on my dock and stood there for a long time, which they do. They are very patient animals. And I thought about Carol and about my son and about the fact that I had spent 4 days in my own home, feeling like a guest. That was the part that settled into me the deepest, not the anger. The anger had come and mostly passed by then. It was the loneliness of it. The specific loneliness of being in a place you love and belonging to it completely and still feeling like you don't quite fit. After everyone left Saturday afternoon, my son stayed behind to help me clean up. We worked for a couple of hours without talking much. He put Carol's photo back on the mantel without me asking. When we were done, he sat at the kitchen table and I made fresh coffee, and we talked for a long time. Not about Felicity. About his mother. About what it had been like that first year after she was gone. About how I'd found this property and what I'd been looking for when I bought it. He cried a little. So did I. Then he said, "She's been telling me that eventually he stopped. That eventually you'd inherit it and make it your own." I finished. He nodded. "Eventually is not now," I said, "and inheriting it doesn't mean erasing what it already is." He understood that. I believe he understood that. I told him about the trust amendment, not as a threat, not as a punishment, just as a fact he needed to know. He was quiet. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. What I didn't tell him that day, but what I've thought about many times since, is what I told my attorney when we wrapped up the paperwork. He asked me if I felt better. I said I felt clearer. There's a difference. Better implies the hurt is resolved. Clearer means you understand where the edges are, where the load-bearing walls actually sit, what holds the structure up. I know where those walls are now. The lake house is mine. My son is my son. Oliver is my grandson, and he still calls me every Sunday evening to tell me about his week, which at age 4 mostly involves fish, dinosaurs, and a character from a cartoon I don't fully understand. Felicity and I have not had a real conversation since Thanksgiving. I don't expect one anytime soon. But my son calls me twice a week now, which he didn't before. And last month he drove up alone on a Saturday, no Felicity, no guests, just the two of us. And we fished off the dock until the sun went behind the ridge and the lake turned that particular color it turns in November, gray-blue and absolutely still. He caught a bass just before dark. Not a big one, but he was unreasonably pleased about it. He held it up for a photo before he let it go, grinning like he was 12 years old. I took the picture. I still have it on my phone. I don't know what comes next. I'm 64, I'm in good health, and I have every intention of sitting on that west-facing porch for as many sunsets as I'm given. The pecan pies will keep. The trust is in order. The heron comes back to my dock most mornings. Patient as ever. Some bridges take a long time to build. Some of them you have to reinforce before you know how much weight they were always meant to carry. I'm still here. The house is still mine, and my son knows the way back. I've been thinking about that heron a lot lately. The one that lands on my dock most mornings and just stands there, completely still for as long as it takes. It doesn't rush, it doesn't force anything. It simply knows where it belongs, and it stays. I used to think patience was something you practiced until you didn't need it anymore. Now I think patience is the thing you build your life on top of. quietly, without announcing it, and everything else either rests on that foundation or it doesn't. What Felicity did wasn't complicated when I strip it down to its bare structure. She saw something that wasn't hers, and she started treating it like it was. That's a failure of character, and character failures like that don't usually announce themselves all at once. They arrive in small movements. A casual pronoun here, a rearranged room there, a photo moved from a mantel to a hallway shelf. By the time you notice the full shape of what's happening, the foundation has already been tested. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have made me call her the night I read that text. Anger would have made Thanksgiving a confrontation instead of a quiet demonstration of where the actual property lines were, legal and otherwise. What saved me was the discipline to sit with what I knew, think clearly about what mattered, and act from that place rather than from the hot center of how I felt. That's something I've had to earn over 64 years. It doesn't come naturally. Early in my career, I was the kind of man who led with his reaction. I said what I thought, immediately and fully, and I told myself that was honesty. It took Carol a long time to help me understand the difference between honesty and just being loud about your feelings. She used to say, "You can be right and still make things worse." She was right about that, the way she was right about most things. The trust amendment wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that because I think it's easy to tell this kind of story as a revenge story, and it isn't one. It was clarity. It was me understanding what I actually had, what I had built and protected and named after the woman I loved, and deciding that I was not going to allow confusion about its ownership to go unaddressed. A man who knows what he has and protects it isn't being cold. He's being responsible. There's a version of kindness that lets things slide until the slide becomes a collapse. I've lived long enough to know that version isn't kindness at all. My son is doing better. That's the part that matters most to me now. He calls twice a week. He drove up alone last month and we fished until dark and didn't need to say much. Oliver still calls on Sundays to tell me about fish and dinosaurs in roughly that order. None of that happened because I gave up what was mine. It happened because I held the line clearly enough that my son could see where it was, and he chose to walk back across it. You can't give a person their dignity by abandoning your own. You can only hold steady and leave the door open and trust that the people worth keeping will find their way back through it. The house is still mine. The porch still faces west. And every evening the sun goes down over Norris Lake the same way it always has. Slowly, completely, without asking permission from anyone.